Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime Wife by Jess. I'm your host, Jess Milliken. On this podcast, we focus on female offenders and what caused them to offend. While many of the cases that we'll talk about involve violent crimes, we'll also be covering less violent crimes committed by women, because understanding why is just as important as understanding what. And because we don't want to just talk about the gruesome cases that are already solved, I also want to bring awareness to the unsolved homicides and missing person cases, the ones that haunt us at night. So every other episode is dedicated to those cases in the hopes that someday those cases will be solved and the families affected can have answers and justice can be served. Before we get into today's case, which is another crazy one, but let's face it, I'm pretty sure they all are, I just want to remind everyone that this is a new podcast and all of your support truly matters. I really am appreciative of all of the support that I've had so far. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who's listened, especially if you're listening to this episode and you've listened to the other 4. Yay. So please share this with others. Follow me on Facebook at The True Crime Wife by Jess and give the podcast 5 stars or thumbs up or whatever the really solid good ratings are on whatever podcast app that you're listening on. Also, if you have a case that you want to see featured, whether it's a female killer that you know about or a missing persons case or an unsolved homicide that you want to see covered, please email me at truecrimewifebyjess@gmail.com. Now, let's get into today's case. And again, it's a doozy. There are some cases in true crime that are disturbing. And then there are cases that feel like they shouldn't even be real. The ones we're talking about. Like today's case. It crosses that line. This is a case that shocked an entire country. A case so brutal, so calculated, and so deeply unsettling that even seasoned investigators struggled to process what they were seeing. It's a story that involves obsession, control, violence, a lot of violence, and ultimately, a crime so horrific, it's been compared to something straight out of a horror movie. But as shocking as this case is, it didn't come out of nowhere. There were warning signs, there was a pattern, and there was a man who knew he was in danger, but may not have realized just how real that danger truly was. Today, we're talking about Katherine Knight, often referred to as Australia's Cannibal killer, and the murder of John Price. This episode contains extremely graphic and disturbing content, so literally when I say listener discretion is strongly advised, it is strongly advised. Now, let's get into it. Okay, so first we're going to talk about Katherine Knight and her childhood, because this is important stuff, guys. Katherine was born in Tenterfield, New South Wales in Australia on October 24th, 1955. She was a twin and was born 30 minutes after her sister Joy, which I'm sure the two of them growing up, that was always a sore spot, I would assume. I'm guessing that, Joy as the older sister was probably like, I'm older than you. And, Katherine's like, yeah, by 30 minutes. I'm not a twin, but I feel like that probably happens. Now, Katherine's parents were Barbara Ruffin and Kenneth Knight. She also had 4 older brothers who were from Barbara's previous marriage to Jack Ruffin. Now, there was a bit of a scandal surrounding Katherine's mom, Barbara. Apparently, Barbara and Ken had an affair while she was married to Jack, which, in a very conservative town, led them to eventually move away to the town of Moree. So when she left with Ken, her 4 boys stayed behind. In 1959, Jack passed away, though, so 2 of the sons came to stay with their mother, Barbara. So it was the 2 boys, Barbara, Ken, and then the 2 sisters, Katherine and Joy. Now, Barbara and Ken would also have 2 more children, so there were like 8 kids in total in the home at one point. So that's a full house. Now, Katherine's home life growing up was anything but good. Definitely not anything to write home about. It was marked by severe family dysfunction, abuse, and domestic violence. Ken was an alcoholic, and it was not uncommon for him to sexually assault Barbara, multiple times, like reportedly 10 times or more per day. So just imagine Katherine and her siblings. They're growing up in this type of environment. And the sexual assault was not a secret. Barbara made it very known to her children as to exactly what was happening. And she spoke openly about sex in front of them, which, maybe that's her being progressive, but not in this case. We could argue that for sometimes, but this is not a progressive household. She would tell her daughters the details of her sex life and how much she hated sex and men. Now, this loathing that her mother shared with them would continue as the girls grew up. I mean, Katherine would at one point tell her mother that one of her partners wanted to take part in something sexual that she didn't want to do. And her mother purportedly told her to, quote, put up with it and stop complaining, end quote. Now, that's pretty awful, She's not winning any Mother of the Year trophies as far as I'm concerned. So Katherine had a lot to deal with growing up. She's got a dysfunctional household where she watched and knew about her mother being sexually assaulted by her father on a regular basis. There was domestic violence, there was abuse, mood swings from her alcoholic father. And to top it all off, Katherine claimed that she was regularly sexually assaulted by multiple family members until she was at least 11 years old. Although she does claim, though, that her father never sexually assaulted her. So these were other family members. And family members have corroborated these claims, and psychiatrists who have evaluated Katherine seem to agree with the claims that Katherine has made. And this is all important to know because Katherine's childhood is likely very important to her psychology, as we'll see, and her mental health as she grew into adulthood. And we are going to talk extensively about her mental health, but we're going to talk right now about her childhood and, her early career and then her relationships. And then we'll talk mental health because we're building up to it, guys, building up to it. Now, Katherine attended Muswellbrook High School until she was around 15 years old and she quit. She left school. Now, it said that she didn't even have basic literacy skills, like she could barely read and write, if at all. And she had the reputation of being a bit of a bully, which I know her story because I researched it, so I'm not surprised by that. That was not a surprise to me at all. But you guys don't know her yet, so we'll talk about this. So she had the reputation of being a bit of a bully. Now, I know we all know that it said that, sometimes kids who are bullies, they are bullying because they have really bad home lives, and it's their way of having some sort of control. Like they have no control at home, but at least at school, they can have that control over someone else. Or they're just mimicking behaviors that they've observed due to the family life that they have. Now, this definitely doesn't excuse anything, but I was not surprised to find out that she was a bully in school, considering the horrible home life that she was dealing with. Again, not an excuse for her behavior. There are plenty of kids who are abused at home who are not bullies at school. I feel like sometimes it goes one way or the other. You're either a bully or you are like the sweetest kid ever. Now, at one point, while Katherine was in school, she attacked a boy with some sort of weapon. And she got into some sort of dispute with a teacher, which led to Katherine being injured. But then it was later discovered that the teacher had actually acted in self-defense. I don't know the details of those two incidents, and I am very curious. Either way, not normal behavior for children of any age to use a weapon against another student or to attack their teachers to the point that the teacher has to use force and hurt them to protect themselves. So this all definitely points to the possibility of something darker lurking beneath the surface. But despite her outbursts and bullying behavior, when she wasn't angry, she was described as a student who had good behavior, minus those two incidents. She frequently earned awards for that good behavior at school. However, academically, like we said, not her forte. She did not shine. She was not getting a gold star. Katherine left school when she was 15. She quit. So what did she do when she left? She didn't have the ability to really read or write well. So immediately after quitting school, she earned a job as a cutter in a clothing factory in Aberdeen. She would stay at this job for 12 months before getting her dream job. And that's how she described it. It was her dream job. And honestly, this is a weird one. I don't know anyone who's ever said this is their dream job. Not that they don't exist. I probably just don't hang out with people that would think that this would be a fun job, but And I've just never personally met anyone who was like, I want to cut up animals for a living. But, 12 months after starting at the clothing factory, she transitioned to a position at the Aberdeen abattoir. Her first job there was cutting up offal or offal. It's OFFAL, which I don't even know what that is. So I had to look it up. So you're welcome. You guys are now going to know what it is if you don't already. Apparently, it's the entrails and internal organs of an animal used as food. So, ew. It doesn't sound good, but then again, it kind of sounds like maybe what they make hot dogs out of or some crap like that. So, if you never see me eat a hot dog again, this could be why. And also, please, if you do see me eating a hot dog, don't remind me of this episode. I'm just going to pretend it didn't happen. So, Katherine would move into a new position at the abattoir. She advanced pretty quickly there. So she went from dealing with entrails and internal organs to moving up and advancing to boning. And she was given her own set of butcher knives. And she was very proud of these. And she actually reportedly hung these above her bed so that she'd have them if she needed them. Yes, you heard me say that right. She hung the butcher knives above her bed in case she needed them. And then she continued that practice up until her imprisonment. Guys, what in the world is going on in a bedroom that you think you might need a butcher knife? I mean, I get like sometimes people keep like guns and stuff in their rooms, for self-defense, but I don't know anybody who's hanging knives above their beds because that's what they're going to use if somebody tries to attack. I don't know. It's just weird, but anyway, that's what she was doing with them. Another little like side note here, because I had no clue what an abattoir was. I had to look it up. So for those who also aren't familiar with an abattoir, I did the research. I'm going to share what I learned because I think it helps us to understand who Katherine is. And this job was her life. Like I said, she described it as her dream job. So first, I learned that abattoirs have workers who specialize in different things. But in the boning hall, which is kind of where Katherine was working, the workers specialize in preparing meat by removing bones, trimming fat, and cutting the meat into like the standardized portions that we get at the grocery store. According to what I read, it doesn't sound like this is an easy job, and not because it sounds gross, which only sounds gross to me. There may be people out there that don't think it's gross. It sounds gross. It's not a job for me. But this is a physically demanding job. It requires focus, so definitely not a job for me. I have a squirrel brain, for those who aren't aware. It requires strong manual skills, hand-eye coordination, like I would definitely fail at this job, and strict adherence to hygiene and safety. Workers in the abattoir use knives, meat hooks, and sometimes saws to cut bones from the meat. In order for somebody to be proficient and successful in this job, they have to be good with knives, they have to know how to use saws, and they've got to be able to use the meat hooks the right way, which I don't know what the right way is, but I'm sure that that's a thing. So you've got to be physically fit and able to stand for long periods and handle heavy carcasses and be able to pay attention to detail to make sure that the cuts of the meat are uniform and meet certain standards. Again, I can't say this enough. This is not a job for me, but this was Katherine's dream job. She loved it, and it sounds like she was very good at it. Maybe she was too good at it. We'll find out why I say that. She would work at the Aberdeen abattoir from the time she was 16 in 1973 until her eventual incarceration. Now, I did find where it looks like she might have worked some other jobs, like in and between there, but that was primarily her career, was at the Aberdeen abattoir doing the stuff with the knives and the meat hooks and the grossness. Yeah. So let's talk about Katherine's relationships, because there were a lot. So we're just going to start right out here. So Katherine met her first husband while she was working at the abattoir. Now, this was David Stanford Kellett. He was a co-worker of Katherine's, and they met in 1973, so not long after she had started working there. Apparently, David was also friends with Katherine's brother, which is another reason that they were able to kind of become close and get to know each other. And they'd actually eventually get married in 1974, so they didn't date for very long before they got married. But some things to know about David. He was a heavy drinker, and he he'd experienced some of his own trauma in his life, which likely accounts for his use of alcohol. So he used to work at a railway in Coffs Harbor, and apparently he witnessed his best friend get killed while he was working there. And there was a school bus that got hit by a train, and he helped rescue some of the children, but 6 children were ultimately killed. And that's some pretty heavy trauma for someone to have to deal with. So he switched to the abattoir to get away from the railway. He needed the career change just to get away from all those triggers that were undoubtedly existent just from being in that environment every day. It does not surprise me that he left that job. So he got a job at the abattoir. When he started working there, he had become friends with Catherine's brother and then ultimately with Katherine. And then they met, they get married. So now we're at their wedding night, which is supposed to be a night of bliss, right? It's the honeymoon. Everything's great. You just got married and spent a whole bunch of money. But it would not be a blissful night, not for David and Katherine. But really quick, I forgot to tell you guys before I tell you about their not blissful wedding night. Right before they get married, Katherine's own mother, so Barbara, says to David, she's quoted as telling David, quote, "You better watch this one or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up in the wrong way or do the wrong thing and you're fucked. Don't ever think of playing up on her, cheating on her. She'll fucking kill you." End quote. Guys. Yeah. Her own mother told her husband this, or her soon-to-be husband this. So there's that. Obviously, he goes through with the wedding anyway. He's probably thinking, yeah, okay, crazy mother-in-law. Like that's a thing, right? So it's their wedding night. And this is where we see the start of the pattern of abuse that would follow Katherine in all of her relationships. Katherine and David had the normal, happy couple, honeymoon, post-wedding intercourse. They did it 3 times, so go them, go David. But when David was done and he fell asleep, Katherine apparently attempted to strangle him. Apparently, her mother had told her at one point that, her mom and Katherine's dad had sex a certain number of times on the night of their wedding night, like 5 times or something. So in Katherine's mind, she needed to have intercourse the same amount of times or more, or it wasn't sufficient. So she's like being competitive with her mom. That's weird. It's weird. But yeah, so because David only did it 3 times, she tried to strangle him on their wedding night. And that wasn't the end of the marriage. They stayed married until 1984. They were married 10 years, guys. Even though she tried to strangle him on their wedding night because he only had sex with her 3 times instead of 5. I just don't even. So they're married. They have a weird wedding night. And then in May of 1976, they have their first child. Their first child's name is Melissa Ann. While she was pregnant, it's reported that David got home late from a dart tournament. And, pregnant wife, she's upset, where have you been, whatever. Everybody gets mad like that sometimes. She burned all of his clothes, and then she hit him over the head with a frying pan, which isn't supposed to be funny, but in my head, all I can see are like the old cartoons where like they get hit in the head and then there's like the stars. And anyway, she hits him in the head. And his injuries were severe enough that he had to be treated for a fractured skull. So, yeah, violent much? And guys, the police were involved in that. But David dropped the charges. He dropped the freaking charges. So, and I don't know why he dropped the charges. I'm thinking maybe he dropped the charges because he wasn't planning on being around for long. Not in like a foreboding like he's going to die way, but in like a he's about to run away type thing. Shortly after the birth of their child, David left Katherine for another woman and moved to Queensland. And this sparked something for Katherine because she completely lost it. Like if she hadn't lost it already with the strangling attempt on their wedding night and then hitting him over the head with a frying pan and causing skull fractures, she really lost it when he up and left her for another woman and moved away. After he left, Katherine was seen one day pushing Melissa Ann in a stroller. And, the stroller's kind of going from side to side, kind of forcefully, almost like she was kind of throwing it from side to side. And then, guys, she did something truly horrible. She put her daughter, not even a month old, her infant daughter, on a railway line right before a train was due to go through the area. Luckily, there was a man in the area who went by Old Ted, and Old Ted rescued the baby. And apparently she wasn't arrested or admitted to the hospital at that time, but then she threatened a boy with a knife, just like some random little boy with a knife, and then she was admitted, I'm guessing forcibly admitted, to the Morrisette Psychiatric Hospital. Now, she's there at the hospital, and she, makes it, I don't know how, if she gave them David's information or what, but David finds out what happened about the baby, about her being at the psych hospital. So he leaves his new girlfriend and moves back to Aberdeen with his mother so that he can help take care of Katherine and the baby. When Katherine is released from the hospital, she's put into the care of her mother-in-law, which is David's mother. And eventually David and Katherine would, go back to living together again full time until 1984. So the strangulation attempt made by Katherine wasn't the only time that violence was rampant in her and David's relationship, and not even just the frying pan to the head thing. After they got back together, when she was released from the hospital, they had another baby on October 6, 1980. That baby's name was Natasha Marie. Now, I am not 100% sure what led them to getting a divorce in 1984, other than the fact that she was abusive and kept hitting him a lot, even including with the frying pan. I didn't even mention, when she was in the psych hospital, she told the psychiatrists or the nurses there that she considered killing the mechanic who had fixed David's car. And why did she want to kill the mechanic who had fixed David's car? Because that allowed him to leave her. Yeah, that's a thing. So we've got, my God, she's done so much crazy stuff, and we're only on the first guy. We're only on David. So David, she tried to strangle him on their wedding night. She hit him over the head with a frying pan and caused a skull fracture. Then she tried to kill their baby. Then she spent some time in a psych ward. Then she got out and had another baby. She told the psych ward people when she was there that, oh my God, I wanted to kill the mechanic to prevent him from leaving. And he stayed. But eventually they get a divorce. They got a divorce, and then in 1986, she met David Saunders. So we just talked about one David Kellett. So we're going to refer to David Saunders by his last name just to make it less confusing. So Saunders and Katherine met in 1986, and they weren't together for very long before he moved in with her and her two children. Saunders was 38 years old, and he was a minor. Now, the violence that we saw with her marriage to David continued into her new relationship with Saunders. Only a year or so after they started dating and they were living together, it was around May 1987, she reportedly cut the throat of his 2-month-old puppy in front of him. She was getting the point across to him that, you ever cheat on me, this is going to happen to you. Yeah. Holy crappers. I think I would have left right then because that's psychotic. But Saunders, he stayed. He hung out for a little bit longer. So in June 1988, Saunders and Katherine welcomed a daughter, Sarah, into the fold. So now Katherine has 3 daughters. And maybe you're thinking, okay, she lost it a little with the puppy thing and things settled down, and that's why Saunders stayed. Well, if you're thinking that, you're wrong, because things continued to be violent and escalate. If you haven't figured it out yet, Katherine is a very jealous person. And apparently, she suspected Saunders was not being loyal to her. And I mean, we saw what she did to the puppy. So you'd think he'd be loyal. And maybe he was cheating, maybe he wasn't. I honestly don't think that mattered to Katherine. She saw what she wanted to see. So there was a final straw for Saunders in this relationship. At some point, Katherine must have, really thought that Saunders was going to leave, or maybe he had just said something about leaving. I'm not sure on what sparked this, but Katherine apparently hit him in the face with an iron and then stabbed him in the stomach with a pair of scissors. Yep, hit him in the head and stabbed him with a pair of scissors. Thankfully, Saunders decided this was a good time for him to leave the relationship. But he didn't just leave. He actually left and went into hiding. He wanted to make sure Katherine could not find him. But he's not a crappy person. So, they had a daughter together. So he did go back at one point because he didn't want to abandon his daughter. So he tried to go check on her. And what did Katherine do? She flipped the script and went to the police and got a protection order, which in Australia they call an apprehended violence order. She got one of those against him. Yeah. And after that, we kind of lose track of Saunders. And Katherine, of course, needed to find a new romantic interest, right? And she does. Now, I just want to throw in here that from what I've gathered, Katherine had a reputation. People knew she had we'll call it a sassy side. And she wasn't someone to be trifled with. People knew this. Even her own mother said she was capable of violence. I mean, she tried to warn David #1 before he married her. But somehow, Katherine gets these guys to fall for her, and I don't get it. I'm not sure what the charm is. I have theories. I think we'll talk about that, but let's just keep going here. So, 1991, Katherine met 43-year-old John Chillingworth, whom she worked with at the abattoir. She's meeting a lot of guys there. I'm guessing it's a pretty male-driven industry, and she's probably one of the few females that are working there. So I did find some sources that said that Chillingworth and Katherine were married from 1989 to 1993, but I'm not 100% on that because it was only noted in maybe one or two sources. Most sources said that they met in 1991. Either way, they were only together for about 3 years. And during that time, they would have a son together. In 1992, Katherine gave birth to their son, Eric. So now she's got 3 daughters and a son. From what I could find, the relationship wasn't great, but there's less anecdotal evidence of any extreme cases of violence during that time. But the relationship still didn't last because Katherine, who we've seen in the past as being jealous and a bit paranoid that her partners were cheating, well, she went out and cheated on Chillingworth. Yep, that's right. She went and had her own little side piece. And this relationship was with the man who would be the last man she'd have a relationship with before her incarceration. Let's talk about John Price. John Price is also known as Pricey to those who knew him. He was born on April 4th, 1955. Katherine and John moved in together in 1995, but had been in a relationship for quite some time prior to that, including while Katherine was with John Chillingworth. Now, John Price had 3 children when he met Katherine, 2 of whom lived with him. John was well known and well liked around town and was known as being someone who was fun to be around. If you were talking about John Price, you might call him a top bloke. That's what they said in a lot of the sources I found. He was a top bloke. He had a down-to-earth personality. He was just one of those all-around nice guys. Some of the sources said that his family and friends considered him likable, generous, kind, and helpful. And he was willing to help anyone with anything if they needed him. So how did Katherine and this nice guy get together? I honestly am not 100% sure, but what we do know is that John was familiar with Katherine's reputation. So my take on this is that maybe he thought he could fix her. He sounds like he was really a nice guy, and we know women go for the bad boy thing a lot because they want to fix them, or they think they'll be different, or something like that, right? So maybe the same thing maybe that's the way John was thinking, or maybe that's why he was attracted to her. I don't know for sure. That's just a thought that I'm having. In 1998, John and Katherine had been dating for a while, and they were living together, and they get into an argument. Well, I say argument. It was really more like a fight. And this was because Katherine wanted to get married, and John was like, no, I'm all set. He didn't want to marry her, and he's not going to be forced to do something he doesn't want to do. But Katherine, she doesn't like it when she doesn't have control. Right? She likes to be the one in control, and she's vindictive. She videotaped things around the house that John had taken from work. And we're not talking he was stealing things, not take things like that. But she videotaped it all and sent it to his boss, which led to John getting fired. Like, he wouldn't marry her, so she messed with this man's livelihood. He'd been working at this job for 17 years. 17 freaking years. And it ended because she was mad that he wouldn't marry her. Maybe he didn't want to marry a psycho. I'm just saying. I don't see anything wrong with that. Now, that's such a severe thing to do. And of course, John was smart. He kicked Katherine out. And news of what she did was spread around town. This isn't a big town. Aberdeen has less than 2,000 people in it. So when something crazy happens, everyone knows about it. If you're from a small town, 2,000 less people, we all know. If something goes on in town, everybody's going to know about it. So this is also why everyone, and I mean probably everyone, was like, what the actual fuck? Because he started seeing Katherine again. A few months later, yeah, they started dating. I don't know what this woman was doing to get these men to keep coming back or getting them to stay with her, but it must have been magic. That's the only thing I can think of. Or she was drugging them. I don't know. I will say John was smart, though. He seems like a forgiving person, so maybe I feel like he was almost like, oh, it's fine. Things will be okay. You were mad. You did something foolish. It had been a few months. Things had cooled down. But like I said, he's smart. So even though they started up researching this case, is that the fighting was more frequent when they got back together. It didn't start back off and things were chill for a while. It was that the fighting and the arguing, it was back and it was worse than it had ever been. And it would continue to escalate. And it escalated to the point that in February of 2000, they got into an argument and Katherine tried to stab him in the chest. Yeah, that happened like a crazy person. This was the final straw for John. Thank goodness. He forced her to leave immediately. Like, he wasn't badly injured. I think she might have actually just attempted to stab him and missed, or if she did get him, it wasn't anything serious, but it was enough for him to be like, okay, we're done. So on February 28th, he went to the Scone Magistrates Court and took Katherine. He was fearful, not only for himself, but also for his two children's safety, because he wanted to keep himself and his kids safe. But he still had a bad feeling, so much so that he told his coworkers at his new job that if he didn't come into work the next day, it was because something had happened and it was Katherine's doing. She's the one that did it. Now, as I've been researching these cases, I've seen a lot of this. I do shorter stories on my TikTok page, and there are so many cases where the victim told someone, if I disappear, it's so-and-so. Or if I turn up dead, it's so-and-so. People aren't stupid. We know when we're in danger. It's just unfortunate that even knowing that we might be in danger doesn't save us. But I think a lot of us just don't think it will actually happen to us. Like, no one is out there thinking of the different ways they'll die, thinking, yeah, I'll probably be murdered. Most of us are like, probably be a car crash or plane crash or old age, like normal things. Nobody's like, oh my God, I think I'm going to be murdered. That's how I'm going to go. No one thinks it's going to happen to them. Unfortunately, John was closer to the truth than he probably thought. So John got the restraining order against Katherine on February 28th and then told his coworkers, if I don't show up to work tomorrow, it's because of Katherine. So we know this. But somehow, Katherine was still at his house that night. And I'm not 100% sure why. I think either he hadn't told her about the protection order, she hadn't been served yet, or she just showed up and he was like, I don't want to deal with this right now, so she can stay. But either way, what we know is that she was at the house that night. So that night, John gets home from work. His kids weren't home. They were staying at friends' houses for the night. He checked in with neighbors, spent some time with people. He did his normal nightly routine until around 11 p.m. when he returned home. And it appears that Katherine arrived at the home either after John had already gone to bed or she was there before, but she got showered, she got ready for bed, and then she woke him up and they had some intercourse. So, so much for a restraining order. But after the intercourse, John went back to sleep. Katherine, because even though this is John's house, apparently she's keeping butcher knives places. Katherine grabbed the butcher's knife that was next to the bed because remember, she hangs them up above the bed and then she leaves them in her room and wherever she is so that she can have easy access to them. And this is when John's statements to his coworkers become all too real. Katherine took the butcher knife from next to her bed and she stabbed John 37 times. Now, there is evidence that he woke up during the attack and that he wasn't able to fight her off and succumbed to his injuries, but the blood splatters and evidence from the crime scene does show that he did put up a little bit of a fight. He was caught off guard, though. He was asleep when she first attacked him, but there's blood all through the house. Like, it's clear, like, he was running around and she was chasing him and continued to stab him 37 times. But Katherine didn't just leave it at this. Once he had succumbed to his wounds and died, she dragged his body downstairs. So remember, she's a strong-ass woman. And then she did some things. And these are absolutely horrible. Like I said at the beginning, viewer discretion, listener discretion is advised because the details of what she did is absolutely horrible. So if you don't want to hear horrible things, like fast forward or stop listening at this point because it's awful. After she stabbed him 37 times and dragged his body downstairs, she skinned him. Yes, you heard that right. She skinned him like you would an animal that you're prepping at the abattoir. She did that. She then hung the skin from a meat hook, or him from a meat hook. And yeah, you probably didn't think it could get worse after skinning him, right? But there we have it. She treated him like an animal at a slaughterhouse. This woman is so freaking disturbed. But wait, there's more. Katherine also decapitated him and cut up pieces of his body and cooked him. According to some sources, she put him in some sort of a dish with potato, pumpkin, beets, zucchini, cabbage, and even gravy, which seriously makes me sick to my stomach. I might not eat again. Not to get, but there is an episode on Crimes That Shook Australia that is about Katherine and the investigators who responded to the scene. And a few of them said that they didn't eat meat for months after this. And I can understand why. I'm not even there and I wasn't there, but just knowing the things that this woman did, I could be a vegetarian. That could be a thing. But why was she cooking him? That's not a thing that most people do if they're going to murder someone. Not that murder is even a normal thing that people do, but normally if somebody murders somebody, they're not cooking them. 2 reasons. 1, she was putting together meals for his kids. His kids, guys. Her plan was to feed him to his own children when they got home from their friend's house. What the fuck? She had the plates at the table, and there were pieces of paper next to them with the children's names on it. So that's how we know that that was her plan. Which, yeah, that's messed up. She also made herself a dish. Yeah, that's the thing. Investigators found a cooked piece of John's left buttock out in the garden. And although the full reason remains unclear, the speculation is that she attempted to eat it, but couldn't, so she threw it outside. Whew. Yeah, I mean, holy crap, this woman. She didn't just kill him. She stabbed him, chased him around the house. She skinned him, hung him up on a meat hook, and then cooked parts of him for herself and his 2 kids. But it gets worse. We're not done. That is not all that this woman did. So before I tell you the final piece of all of this, the final OMG thing that this woman did, let's talk about how investigators found the crime scene because, well, as predicted, John didn't show up to work the next morning. And his coworkers are like, oh my God, he said that if this happened, it was Katherine. Something's wrong. And they're thinking, hopefully he's just sick. It's just a coincidence, nothing crazy like that would happen. So they go to the home and they couldn't get anyone to answer the door. His truck's in the yard. So they called the police. The police get there, they go in, and they found this scene that we have talked about. A scene so grisly, like I said, Many of them said that they went months without eating meat because it was so horrific. And again, I don't blame them. They walked into a scene with a body hanging on a meat hook, his skin hanging around, and his decapitated body with pieces of him missing in a dirty-ass kitchen with plates made up. It was a grisly scene, but also clear that this guy had been cooked. And remember how I mentioned that he was decapitated? Yeah, his head was missing. They noticed that as well. Like, not only is he decapitated, but where the hell is his head? Well, and this is the OMG part. In the freaking pot on the stove. She cooked his head. You can't make that crap up unless you're making a horror movie. And honestly, this really does sound like it came from a horror movie. It sounds more like a horror movie than it does a true crime story of something that actually happened. This is the things that nightmares are made of. So the police are there. John Price, they found him. He's been murdered. Where is Katherine? Obviously, investigators just got there. They still have to investigate. They don't know who did this to John. They could speculate, but they really don't know anything. So they've walked into this whole scene, and all they know is what they see. Then they hear something from another room, and they walk into a bedroom where they find Katherine passed out on a bed. She had taken a large amount of pills, possibly some sleeping pills, but it wasn't enough to actually kill her. But they did make her sleepy and she was not able to be woken up. So she was taken by ambulance to the hospital and she ended up being completely fine. So, she tried to I think she was trying to unalive herself or trying to kill herself. Let's talk about what happened after the hospital. So once investigators were able to confirm that Katherine was lucid, she wasn't mentally ill, although I beg to disagree on that. I mean, in order to do something like this, there's something definitely wrong with you. Like, it's not normal. But she was fit to be interrogated and to be questioned. And she was awake and in a right frame of mind. So they sit her down and they ask her what happened. Katherine claims to have no recollection of the night. And she really didn't have a lot to say about John's death. But she did have a lot to say about the apparent abuse that she had experienced. Now, in an interview conducted by Jasmine Kaslowskis, Sergeant Wells recalled that Katherine just kept ranting about being a victim of domestic violence and a victim of abuse by men her entire life. And she just kept going on, but at no point did she take any ownership or admit any guilt for John's death. In that interview with Sergeant Wells, he also recalled how odd he found her. Like, she didn't meet the stereotypes. He had never come across someone like Katherine. He also noted in his interview that while he was sitting there with Katherine, at one point he just kind of stopped and looked at her and just realized, this woman is full of shit. Okay, those are my words, not his. But he did say that he just realized, like, looking at this woman was saying everything but the truth. So Sergeant Wells interviewed previous partners of Katherine Knight and, well, we know how that went. They all corroborated what Sergeant Wells believed, that Katherine was full of it. And she was the abusive one in the relationship. Before we talk about the trial and sentencing, let's dive into Katherine's mind. Because I'm sure that's exactly where we all want to be right now, right? No? Well, too bad. Here we go, guys. We're going to talk about it. Let's go into the mind of this lady. Katherine Knight is one of those cases that sits at the edge of comprehension, where true crime starts to feel less like something that happened in the real world and more like something pulled straight out of a horror film. But if we stop at shock, and if we stop at labeling her as simply evil or monstrous, we miss something important. Because behind, and this is the whole point of this podcast, behind even the most disturbing crimes, there's still a human mind. And understanding that mind doesn't excuse what happened, but it does explain how something like this becomes possible. And that's why we talk about the psychology and what's going on inside the heads of these killers. Now, when we look at Katherine Knight through a psychological lens, one of the most consistently cited diagnoses for her is borderline personality disorder, or BPD. Borderline personality disorder is a disorder of emotional regulation, identity, and relationships. According to the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is used in the United States to diagnose mental health disorders and mental health issues, including borderline personality disorder. This disorder is defined as a pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships, self-image, along with marked impulsivity. For a diagnosis to occur, at least 5 of the following criteria must be met. So here they are, guys. And as I say these, think about Katherine and what we've learned about her so far. And I think you're going to find that she meets a lot of the criteria. First, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Unstable and intense relationships that alternate between idealization and devaluation. Identity disturbance. Impulsive behaviors. And these aren't just normal impulsive behaviors that are potentially self-damaging. Recurrent suicidal behavior or self-harm. We just saw that. Emotional instability. Chronic feelings of emptiness. Intense or inappropriate anger. And transient stress-related paranoia, can't talk today, or dissociation. What this means in real terms is that someone with borderline personality disorder may experience emotions at an intensity that most people never reach. Like, love isn't just love, it's overwhelming, consuming. Rejection isn't just being rejected, it's catastrophic. A perceived abandonment, whether real or imagined, can trigger a whole psychological crisis. It's all of the emotions that we feel on a regular basis without having borderline personality disorder, but on a completely more extreme level, because that's how it's processed in their minds. And relationships for somebody with this disorder can often become the center of that emotional storm. Now, when we apply this framework to Katherine Knight, it's easy to see why this diagnosis is so accurate for her and how she met the criteria. Her relationships were not just unstable, they were often violent, intense, and marked by extreme emotional swings. There are accounts of deep attachment, followed by explosive anger, jealousy, and revenge. We saw all of these things in every single one of her relationships. This kind of relational volatility aligns closely with what clinicians describe as splitting. And splitting is a defense mechanism. It's common in people with borderline personality disorder. It's where a person alternates between seeing others as entirely good or entirely bad. But there's no middle ground. It's either good or it's bad. So in her relationships, we saw this frequently, this splitting, where she would be obsessed, possessive, and completely overwhelmingly in love with someone. And then one thing would happen, or a perceived thing would happen, and all of a sudden they were the worst person ever. And she was looking for revenge. She's reaching out to their work to get them fired. I mean, things were either good with Katherine or they weren't. And that's all there is to it. Another key component is fear of abandonment in borderline personality disorder. I mean, abandonment for them, it's not just uncomfortable, it can feel annihilating. It threatens their sense of identity and emotional stability and safety. The reaction to abandonment is not always sadness either. It's often rage. And that's exactly what we see. And, we saw every time that she thought that someone was going to leave her, they were cheating on her. She saw that as abandonment, and she didn't react with sadness. She reacted with rage every single time. So in the case with John Price, John's murder occurred in the context of a relationship that was ending. He was trying to leave. He had a restraining order. He'd just gotten one. From a psychological perspective, this moment can act and did act as a trigger. It was an emotional breaking point where fear, anger, and desperation converged. This doesn't mean that the act was uncontrollable or unconscious, but it suggests that the emotional intensity that was driving it may have been extreme, and in fact, it really was extreme. Some experts distinguish between impulsive violence and what's sometimes referred to as instrumental or goal-directed behavior. Now, impulsive violence is reactive. So it's driven by emotion in the moment. Then you have instrumental behavior. That's purposeful. Even if the purpose itself is rooted in anger or revenge, it's still done with purpose. Katherine's actions appear to contain elements of both types of behavior, impulsive and instrumental. The initial attack of John may have been fueled by emotional escalation, but the aftermath, so what she did to the body, was not chaotic or disorganized. It required time, focus, and a certain level of composure. This duality is part of what makes the case so psychologically unsettling. And I didn't mention it earlier, but she did leave after she killed John. She left the house and went to an ATM to get money before returning to the home. So she even had time away from what she had done to think about things. Consider what she'd done. She even had the opportunity to just leave his body and flee. But instead, she returned to the home and continued the acts that would traumatize a nation. Now, we also talked about the trauma in Katherine's background, including the claims of childhood abuse and exposure to violence. While not all of these claims were fully substantiated in court, many of them were. And trauma is a known risk factor for the development of personality disorders, including BPD. Early experiences of instability, neglect, abuse can shape how a person processes emotions. So it also affects how a person forms attachments and how they respond to stress later in life. She had a traumatic childhood. We heard about it. We talked about it. I don't think anybody can counter that and be like, oh no, her childhood was pleasant and fun. It wasn't. But it's important to say this clearly. Trauma and personality disorders do not cause someone to commit murder. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what the psychology says. The vast majority of people with BPD are not violent towards others. In fact, they're far more likely to harm themselves than anyone else. It's just like when we talked about Joanna Dennehy a couple episodes ago. She was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. But again, just because someone has that disorder doesn't mean they're going to kill people. But it does give us some insight into how they think and how their psychology dictates how they respond in different situations. And we saw the escalation in this case. So, what makes Katherine Knight's case particularly striking? Oh, there's so much. So, just because somebody has BPD or is diagnosed with BPD does not mean that they're going to kill someone. Just like with the antisocial personality disorder that we talked about. In rare and extreme cases, when all of the factors align, intense emotional dysregulation, perceived abandonment, a history of violence, and situational triggers, the risk of outward aggression can increase. And that's what we saw with Katherine. It was all of these factors lined up. It's like the stars aligned and said, Katherine Knight, you are a murderer. Again, Katherine is guilty of sin and deserves to be behind bars. But it's also important for people to understand what's going on inside a person's head. Katherine Knight can be understood as someone with a deeply disordered emotional world. She was shaped by instability, intense attachments or lack of attachments, and explosive reactions. And at the same time, she could be someone who made choices that were deliberate, violent, and irreversible. And really, really disturbing. Let's talk about Katherine's trial. So we know what was going on in Katherine's brain, what made her brain so weird. So let's check out the trial and how that went. Katherine was officially charged with John's murder on March 2nd, 2001. Now, her attorneys offered a plea of guilty to manslaughter instead of murder, which the courts rejected. And that honestly makes sense. Now, that not guilty plea was based on Katherine's assertions that she had zero recollection of what had happened. Oh, I think I skipped. So Katherine, she was charged and they initially put in that plea of guilty to manslaughter. And when the courts rejected it, they put in a not guilty plea for the charge of murder. Now, that not guilty plea was made under the assertion that Katherine claimed that she had zero recollection of what had happened. So she's kind of claiming some sort of temporary amnesia or something. On October 15th, 2001, the trial starts. Justice Barry O'Keefe oversees the trial, and he made it clear to the jury that they may need to excuse themselves due to the violence that would be depicted during the trial, as there would be a great deal of photographic evidence of the crime scene. There were 60 possible jurors, and 5 of them took that opportunity to excuse themselves from sitting on the jury. Judge O'Keefe also ordered a psychiatric assessment of Katherine to assess whether she was fully aware of the consequences of her decisions. Katherine's legal team was attempting to claim that Katherine was suffering from dissociation and amnesia, like I said before. Now, I don't know about all of that, but the psychiatrist found that she was perfectly sane, and 2 of them gave her that diagnosis that we just talked about of borderline personality disorder. During the initial hearing, Katherine's attorneys requested that Katherine be excused for certain parts of the trial so that she wouldn't have to listen to the grisly details. Yeah, that was a thing. So the judge denied the request, though. He was like, nope, she's got to sit here and listen. So the second day of trial, they changed the plea from not guilty to guilty with no explanation provided. Although even though she changed the plea to guilty, she still wouldn't take responsibility for her actions. She never said she was sorry for her actions. She took 0 responsibility or accountability for what she had done beyond just changing her plea to guilty. During the sentencing, the court recounted what had transpired the night of John's murder, including that he was skinned, he was decapitated. Supposedly, Katherine became very agitated during this and had to be sedated, but that's purely anecdotal. I couldn't find any actual evidence to support that happened, but it was mentioned in an article. Now, on November 8th, 2001, Justice O'Keefe determined that due to the severity of the crime, Katherine's lack of remorse and unwillingness to take responsibility for her actions required a severe penalty. And Katherine officially became the first woman in Australia to receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. I'm going to read this quote from the sentencing hearing from Justice O'Keefe because he put it very nicely here. Beginning the quote, "The prisoner, Katherine Mary Knight, does not qualify for mercy. She engaged in cruel, vicious behavior to Mr. Price. She showed him no mercy. She has not expressed any contrition or remorse. If released, she poses a threat to the security of society. I'm satisfied beyond any doubt that such a murder was premeditated. I'm further satisfied in the same way that not only did she plan the murder, but she also enjoyed the horrific acts which followed in its wake as part of a ritual of death and defilement." End quote. Nicely said, Justice O'Keefe. Of course, Katherine didn't let this sit, so in 2006, she did appeal the life sentence. Her attorneys noted that her sentencing was too extreme. 3 justices reviewed the case and dismissed the appeal. One of the justices gave a statement during the appeal, Peter McClellan, and he stated that Katherine's crimes were appalling and almost beyond contemplation in a civilized society. According to sources, Katherine Knight's file is marked never to be released. And again, she is the only female in Australia's history to ever be given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. And she is currently incarcerated at the Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre in Sydney, Australia, which from what I understand is a high security prison. And that is where she's staying. She has no potential possibilities of being put into a less secure prison. But how is she doing in prison? It's been a while. So let me tell you about it because I wanted to find out. This was back in 2001. It's been 20 years. Let's see how she's doing. So according to an article published by news.com.au, which was written by Candace Sutton, Katherine is referred to as Nana in the all-women's prison. In the many years that she's been in custody, Katherine has apparently found religion, which, let me just say, it seems like they always find religion, so that's just what they all do. She spends her days painting, knitting, although I'm not sure I'd want her anywhere near knitting needles, but that's just me. I'm really not sure. Maybe they have special ones that aren't able to stab people. I don't know. And she kind of acts as a sort of leader or the queen bee. That's how she's referred to as the queen bee of the place. She kind of helps to sort out disputes among prisoners. She's had fairly good behavior, according to the article anyway. To a point. Despite the good behavior, one of the people in the prison who provided information to Sutton for the article that she wrote Catherine's not allowed near knives, and she can't have a cellmate in case she kills again. She's got some good behavior. She found religion, but she's still not trusted. That's what I gathered from that, even inside a high security prison. There is a book called Green is the New Black, written by James Phelp. And the author, he goes into detail about Catherine's life in the prison. She works in the prison making headphones. She is constantly flanked by guards. She has a prison cell that's the same size as everyone else's, so no special treatment, even though she's the only one staying there forever. She's definitely a bit of a hoarder. She keeps everything she's ever been given. There's also evidence that she's made efforts to make her cell homey, which makes sense since she'll be there for the rest of her life. She has knitting and arts and craft supplies everywhere, and apparently she's quite the painter. Her painting she actually sells and helps make money for the prison. It doesn't sound like she ever receives phone calls or letters or anything from the outside world. Her friends and family have essentially abandoned her, which I'm a very empathetic person, so I feel bad in a way until you hear the rest of the stuff I'm about to tell you and when you think about all the things that she's done. But even freaking Ted Bundy had people contacting him from the outside, and he was a serial killer. But again, we're going to hear some more things about her, and the empathy kind of dwindles a little. An officer who was interviewed for the article that I was just talking about by Sutton said that he described Katherine as the top boss in the prison. She doesn't take crap from anyone, but she definitely gives all the crap to the guards. According to that officer, when it's time to search her cells, she won't leave while they do it unless they physically remove her. So now they've just kind of given up and they just let her stay while they're searching the cell. But if they touch anything, she'll like question them and she'll yell at them, like, why are you touching that? But when it comes to her relationship with her fellow inmates, it looks very different. They go to her to talk, to ask questions, and none of them will do anything without permission from Katherine. So she's in charge. It's probably her second best dream job besides being an abattoir worker. But how did she get to be the top boss or the queen bee in the jail? Well, guards say that she's never raised her hands to anyone in the jail. Like, she's never gotten into a fight with anyone in the jail. So she didn't get the title by way of intimidation or of violence. She has a lot of respect, from what I read, for the other inmates. So I think the reason that maybe she's been put on this like top boss pedestal stems from the fact that, she did something that's terrifying. She's the first woman, only woman, as far as I'm aware, in Australia to ever receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. So she'll never leave this prison for a less secure one. She can never do jobs on the outside of the prison like other prisoners can. Like, she can't go mow lawns. So maybe they respect her because they're terrified of her or they're in awe of her. Whatever the reason, life isn't horrible for Katherine in jail. Which honestly, part of me is kind of like, that kind of sucks, because I'm sure that like John Price's family would like to think that she's suffering. If I was in their shoes, I'd be like, you know what? She should be suffering for what she did to him. But it doesn't seem like that's the case. And either way, we can at least all rest easy knowing that she's never getting out of jail. And they do take a lot of precautions to ensure that she stays in there and that she can't escape. Before we close out today's episode, I want to take a moment to remember the man that really truly is at the center of this story, John Price. John was born on April 4th, 1955 in New South Wales, Australia. He was a father, a friend, and someone who was deeply loved by the people around him. From everything we know, John wasn't just well-liked, he was the kind of person that people naturally gravitated toward, the kind of man you describe as easygoing, generous, and always willing to lend a hand. Friends and family remembered him as someone who brought warmth into a room, someone who could make you laugh, who showed up when you needed him, and who genuinely cared about the people in his life. He was known as a, quote, top bloke, a phrase that in Australia says a lot. It means he was solid, dependable, good to his core. Most importantly, John was a father. He had children who loved him, who depended on him, and who should have had many more years with him. Years that were taken in the most unimaginable way. The few personal tributes that exist appeared to have been written by his son, who is also named John or Jonathan, and they paint a picture that's even more powerful than any headline or report ever could. A son who described him not just as a father, but as a mate, a hero, and a man whose love, laughter, and kindness left a lasting mark. And that's who John Price really was, not just a victim in a case that shocked a nation. And I want to make sure that people don't forget him, because everyone is always focused on Katherine and what she did and how she got to that point. But what about John Price? He's not just a victim. He was a man who was loved deeply, he's missed endlessly, and he's remembered not for how he died, but for how he lived. So we end today's episode taking a moment to hold space for John, for the life he lived, the people who loved him, and the memory that still remains. So here's a tribute that was written by John's son, Jonathan. It was published online on February 25th, 2016. Quote, "To my mate, my dad, forever missed, but never forgotten. No amount of words describes how much I love and cherish the man you were and always will be to me. It breaks my heart when I hear your name, but makes me proud of the man I am today because of you. Love always, your son, Jonathan." Rest in peace, John Price. This case is one that stays with you, not just because of how horrifying it is, but because of how real it feels. The warning signs were there. The fear was there. John even said it out loud, and still, it wasn't enough to stop what happened. And I think that's one of the hardest parts of true crime. Sometimes people know they're in danger. Sometimes they do everything they can to protect themselves, and it still doesn't change the outcome. Cases like this force us to sit with that uncomfortable truth. They remind us how complex human behavior is, how trauma, personality, choice, and circumstance can all collide in ways that are devastating and irreversible. But they also remind us why we talk about these stories in the first place. To remember the victims, to understand the why, and to keep these conversations going so that maybe someday something like this can be recognized sooner or prevented entirely. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of True Crime Wife by Jess. If you want to hear more stories like this, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps the show grow. I also love reading the reviews and getting feedback directly from you all, the listeners, so that I can continue to improve and provide the best possible podcast experience for all of you lovely people. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the other 4 episodes that have been uploaded, this is a new podcast. It's not hard to catch up. Go take a listen. And if you want more information about this case, go ahead and check out my Facebook page, The True Crime Wife by Jess, and follow there for podcast updates and additional content. And as always, remember that every crime has a breaking point, and every woman has a line she never thought she'd cross, until she does. I'll see you in the next episode.